The ongoing Operation Epic Fury raises a crucial question. How is this actually going to end? Because when you remove the head of a system like Iran's, you don't automatically get peace. You simply get uncertainty. And uncertainty is where conflicts either collapse or spiral. Inside Iran, the biggest variable is what happens in Tehran. The death of Ayatollah Khamenei created a vacuum that Iran's constitution wasn't designed to handle under bombardment. Technically, power passed to a temporary leadership council, but in reality, the real power now sits with whoever controls the guns, and that's the IRGC. And the IRGC isn't just a military force. It controls large parts of Iran's economy, energy infrastructure, and internal security apparatus. That makes it not only a military actor, but a political and financial power center. Right now, Iran is split between three possible internal paths. The first is collapse. If economic pressure, leadership decapitation, and ongoing strikes weaken the regime enough, protests could explode nationwide. We've already seen in the past that large parts of the Iranian population are deeply frustrated with the system. If security forces fracture, especially mid-level IRGC commanders, the entire structure could fall. But that fracture would likely begin quietly, through local commanders refusing orders, regional governors acting independently, or economic paralysis in major cities like Tehran and Isfahan. That would be Washington's ideal outcome: regime change without invasion. But collapse isn't automatically clean. Libya showed us that removing leadership without a replacement can create warlordism. Iran is large, diverse, and heavily armed. A power vacuum could turn into regional fragmentation. Kurds in the west, Baluchis in the southeast, competing military factions elsewhere. That wouldn't be victory. That would simply be chaos. The second path is what analysts call a managed surrender. Instead of total collapse, a more moderate figure inside the system steps forward. Someone who keeps the state intact but agrees to dismantle nuclear and missile programs in exchange for an end to the bombing and sanctions relief. That model would preserve Iran's institutions while stripping its most threatening capabilities. It would also allow regional powers like Saudi Arabia and the UAE to de-escalate without losing face. It's cleaner, faster, and more stable for energy markets. But it depends on whether hardliners allow it, and whether Washington is willing to stop short of total dismantlement. The third path is the most dangerous: decentralized resistance. Even without a supreme leader, the IRGC can operate. It has mobile missile launchers, drone networks, regional proxies, and a deep bench of commanders. It also has experience operating under sanctions and isolation. That matters. Instead of collapsing, the regime could adapt, shrink, go underground. That turns the war from a decapitation campaign into a long attritional fight, one built around drones, missile harassment, and pressure on global shipping lanes. And that's where things get expensive for all of us: the long war. If this drags out for months instead of weeks, everything changes. Energy markets are already reacting. Brent crude jumped sharply after the strikes, and natural gas prices in Europe spiked when Qatari facilities were hit. Even without a formal blockade, the Strait of Hormuz is effectively constrained, because insurers and shipping companies don't want to risk missile attacks. Roughly a fifth of global oil passes through that narrow waterway. Even partial disruption sends shockwaves through supply chains. If oil moves past $100 per barrel and stays there, the political cost inside the United States grows fast. Gas prices rising to $4 per gallon or higher isn't just economic, it's political. And war at home depends heavily on whether people feel the pain directly. Then there's munitions. High-intensity air campaigns burn through precision weapons quickly. Tomahawks, interceptors, air defense missiles. These are not infinite. Replenishing them takes time, industrial capacity, and budget approvals. If the campaign stretches, stockpile strain becomes real. That matters globally, because while Washington focuses on Iran, other players are watching closely. Moscow's angle. Russia's public position is predictable: condemnation. But strategically, Moscow benefits from this war lasting longer. Higher oil prices means more revenue for Russia's budget. Western attention shifting toward the Middle East means less focus on Ukraine. If U.S. air defense systems and interceptors are redirected to CENTCOM, Ukraine's defensive posture weakens. Even small delays in weapons deliveries can shift momentum on the battlefield. There's also a subtle shift happening. Russia no longer relies heavily on Iranian drone imports the way it did earlier in the Ukraine war. Production has been localized. So even if Iranian facilities are destroyed, Moscow can sustain its drone campaign. In short, Russia doesn't need Iran to win. It just needs the US to stay busy. If epic fury becomes a prolonged campaign, Moscow quietly gains strategic breathing room. Beijing's calculation. China's position is more cautious, but more strategic. Publicly, Beijing calls for de-escalation. Privately, this war is a live-fire laboratory. China is studying how US stealth aircraft perform, how American logistics sustain tempo, how quickly missile inventories deplete, how carriers are positioned. It's also observing how domestic US politics react to prolonged overseas operations. Most importantly, Beijing is watching what happens to US force posture in the Indo-Pacific. With significant naval assets concentrated near Iran, deterrence gaps appear in Asia. At one point, the only US carrier normally present in Asia was in maintenance. That doesn't mean China moves tomorrow, but it changes calculations. If the Iran war drags, the risk of increased pressure on Taiwan rises. Not necessarily invasion, but more aggressive airspace incursions, drone activity, and coercive exercises designed to test response times. The escalation trap. The most dangerous scenario isn't collapse or quagmire. It's miscalculation leading to mass casualties. Iran has already mobilized regional proxies and launched retaliatory strikes on US bases across the Gulf, while Israel has expanded its campaign into Lebanon. The threshold for regional conflict has already been crossed. But if an Iranian missile seriously damages a US carrier, or if these ongoing strikes result in massive civilian death tolls in a Gulf state, escalation pressures will completely explode. No one officially wants that, but history is full of wars that expanded accidentally. The most likely ending. Based on current dynamics, the most plausible outcome isn't total regime collapse or a full-scale regional war. It's a pressured restructuring, a managed transition. If strikes continue to degrade military infrastructure while back-channel diplomacy opens through intermediaries like Oman or Switzerland, a deal becomes possible. Iran agrees to dismantle nuclear threshold capabilities under inspection. Missile ranges are capped. Regional proxy funding is reduced. In exchange, bombardment stops and phased sanctions relief begins. The regime survives, but weakened and constrained. Energy markets stabilize, shipping resumes gradually. Oil drops back toward pre-war levels. Washington claims strategic success. Tehran claims survival. And the world moves on. Slightly more unstable than before, but not in flames. That's the cleanest path, but it depends on timing. If this operation concludes within weeks, political momentum stays intact. If it stretches into months, domestic pressure, global economic strain, and opportunistic moves by Russia or China complicate everything. Bigger implications. Even if epic fury ends successfully, the global order shifts. The message is clear. Regime decapitation is back as a doctrine. That has ripple effects. Authoritarian governments worldwide will harden leadership protection. Nuclear threshold states may accelerate weaponization out of fear of vulnerability. France has announced that it will stop publicly disclosing the number of its nuclear weapons and plans to increase its arsenal. Proxy warfare becomes more attractive than direct confrontation. And the energy lesson is obvious too. The Strait of Hormuz remains the most fragile choke point in the global economy. Even without a formal blockade, fear alone can disrupt trade. The conflict also reinforces a broader reality. Modern wars aren't isolated. Iran connects to Ukraine. Ukraine connects to energy. Energy connects to inflation. Inflation connects to elections. Elections connect to global alignment. Operation Epic Fury isn't just a Middle Eastern event. It's a stress test of the entire international system.